Hi, I'm Wendy. Welcome to my West Coast garden. So if January is my most dreaded gardening month, March is my absolute favorite. It's full of hope and the possibility of spring. There's no bugs, there's no blight, and other than a slug or two, it's all renewal and growth. If you saw my spring planting tips from last year, you might remember my advice to consult a local planting guide. So I like the one here, the Westcoast Seeds guide, and that's the one that works the best for my garden season, but any local planting guide will work. What it tells me is what plants I should be planting now. So those that are going to be ready to put into the ground in about 8 weeks, which would be the beginning of May. It's mid-March. So in addition to those plants like tomatoes and peppers that need that sort of 6 to 8 weeks to get big enough to put in the ground, I'm also going to be planting some plants that it's technically warm enough to put in the ground at this time of year, but because the slugs have no other food source, they will just mow down the spinach and the lettuce as soon as it pops out of the ground. So what I like to do is to get that to a decent size at this time of year and then plant it in the ground. I'll plant it, let it germinate in here, and then take it out of the greenhouse and let it acclimatize. But I'll sort of start it and in a couple of weeks probably set it out. As well, I'm going to be planting some other plants like some of my basilics, but we'll get to that later on. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just take some seedling mix. I use sterile seedling mix. It's recommended. Plants have enough nutrients in their seed to kind of keep them going for the first little bit, and then once they get their true leaves, I fertilize them and then transplant them not too long after that. But the seedling mix is great. It doesn't have anything in it that's going to harm the plant's germination, and it will, I find it the best product, as most, and I think most gardeners would recommend that you start with a sterile seedling mix. So I will just dump a bit of this into, I just have a mixing bowl here, and you can see it's quite dry. And so you do need to moisten it quite a bit, and if you over moisten it, I just leave enough space that I can add some more dirt. So I just take a measuring cup and add some water and moisten it, and then I'll stir it in. It kind of takes a bit for the dirt to absorb the water, and then add a bit more if you need to. So you've got a consistency that's moist but not too wet. Like you can see this, I squeeze it and there's water coming out. So I'll just add a bit more seedling mix. It's a great thing to do with your kids because it makes a huge mess inside the house if you're doing it in the kitchen, which is always a blast for kids. So mix that all in. That seems like it's about the right consistency. So again, it's moist, but it's not wet. And then what we'll do is we're going to fill, I've washed a bunch of my containers that I used last year, but I know in Canada you can buy the kits, and they come with sort of several of these seedling pots, and then they come in a long tray that you set them in. And it comes with a plastic piece over top. I don't use the plastic piece. I find it's not that useful, but I live somewhere that it's really, really wet. And so I just bottom water my seeds. When they start to dry out on the top, I bottom water, and I find that works just fine for me. And they fit nicely into these seed trays. As I say, they come with a cover, a plastic cover that goes over top. I don't use that. Some people like to use that to keep the moisture until they germinate. There's also, most seeds don't need sunlight to germinate, so you can germinate them on top of the fridge or somewhere that's a warm surface. What I do is I just put the soil in, put the seeds in, put it under the grow lights, and then kind of forget about it until it sprouts. And that works for me. even the seeds that don't need light seem to germinate that way. So anyway, you take so what we're doing is we're taking these little seed holders and filling them with dirt. You want to get rid of all the air pockets, so kind of fill them up with this damp seedling mix and then press it down and get it pretty close to the top, but you want a little bit of space. And you don't want it to be hard in there, but you do want it to be firm. I'll fill these all up, and then we'll put some holes in where we're going to plant the seeds. And with these, if you're going to transplant from these, and most people do, you can plant more than one seed in them. So depending on what you're planting and how much space you have under your grow lights, because you do want them to stay in these containers until they get their true leaves, and then you're likely going to transplant them. If you want to keep them in here longer, you probably only want to thin down to one seedling, because otherwise they're going to get root bound really quickly and then they're not going to thrive as much. So let me just fill these seed packets and then we'll go ahead and plant some of the seeds. Okay, so I have now filled a number of vessels with dirt, and I just wanted to show you I have a variety of different seeds that I'm planting. So I've got ones that I've saved. These are onions that went to seed last year, so I will plant some of those. We've got some peas that went to seed. Then I've got some new seeds that I bought, and then some, again, open pollinated seeds that I just used the same envelope, and I have saved those over the years. So I'll just plant a couple to give you the idea. Now, I've just got one of those pokers that you use to tie up your turkey when you roast it, and I'm going to use that to poke holes to put the seeds in. Some of these seeds are super small, the tomatoes, for example, and so some people would use tweezers or something. I don't get that precious about it. The other thing that you will need is something to mark the seeds. I buy craft sticks, ideally, or popsicle sticks at the dollar store. Ideally, I would prefer if they were non-colored, but the colored ones actually work okay because it helps you to keep track of the different varieties, and you will be able to tell eventually a tomato from, I don't know, a pea or a zinnia, but you may not be able to tell one variety from another, so it's a good idea to mark them. Every year I think I've marked well, and then I get I forget to mark something, or it gets confused when I transfer it, and then I don't know what variety things are. So I've got all those supplies there, and we'll just start with tomatoes. So as I say, these are Sakura tomatoes. I've saved them from last year. They did really quite well. I like the variety a lot. And so I'm going to go for 6 plants. I'll just use this container here with 6 dividers. So I'll just put a few into my hand. I only need 6, and so I don't need to go too crazy. And make sure they're separated out. My grandma always says to plant seeds the depth that the seed is. So the package probably says about 1/4 of an inch. So what I will do is, with tomato seeds, they're quite small, but I'll maybe just poke a couple of holes in here, and I will plant 2 per cell, and then I'll either separate them out or keep the strong one. There's 1. 2. Sometimes with tomatoes I don't even poke a hole. I just loosen up the soil and then pat it down, because they are quite small, and it's easy to lose track of what you're doing. So Mine's kind of stuck together. All right, so that's 2 in each of the 6 cells. And then what I'll do is I'll just pat it down, and then I'll put a little dirt to cover. Okay, so I've written on the marker the date and the name of the variety, and then I will just stick it in there, and that will germinate in a week probably. Just press those down. And then I'll just show you one other thing. I will show you some lettuce. So we'll just stir up the surface because lettuce is quite small. These ones, so you can see pelleted, they've got, lettuce seeds are quite small, but they've got them more than one in kind of bundled together, so it's just sort of easier to plant them. So so that's one kind of lettuce. But there's some butter crunch that is not pelleted, and again the seeds are really small, so I will try and separate them out, but it's a bit difficult, so I won't get too fussy about it, though I will try and separate them. It'll make it easier for transplanting purposes, but I'm not going to get too fussy. Probably got more than I need in a couple of different areas. Okay. So again, we will be planting lettuce every couple of months, or sorry, every couple of weeks, because it starts going to seed when the weather gets warmer, but I'll just put those seeds down. They're really small, so they barely need covering with soil. There we go, 1 tray of seedlings all planted. I will put them under the grow lights, and as I say, some of them I'll move out to the greenhouse after they've germinated. And that's all there is to it. So I hope you enjoy your spring planting, and that where you live, the countdown to summer has begun. See you next time on my West Coast Garden.